Okay, so one of the things that we've already learned is that the colonists in Great Britain had argued over the laws and the taxes for 10 years before the fighting broke out. And the Revolutionary War itself lasted for more than 6 years. As the British found out after the French War, wars are expensive and they create a lot of problems even after the war is over. And sometimes the problems that are created after the war is over can be even bigger than the problems that they had, which caused them to fight to begin with. So one of the things that the British learned was that taxing the people to the point of frustration and anger is a bad thing. And they found out that people want to be heard and they might rise up against unpopular decisions. And after so many years of just the way King George ruled, the people were ready for a change. So the Treaty of Paris in 1783 ended the Revolutionary War. And if that sounds like something we've already talked about, it's because there had been another Treaty of Paris that was signed 20 years earlier in 1763 that was actually what ended the French and Indian War. So the treaty that was signed in 1783 to end the Revolutionary War not only ended the fighting between the Americans and the British, but it also established the United States of America as an officially recognized country. So there were three leading American diplomats who signed the treaty, and the three were Ben Franklin and John Jay and John Adams, who must have been back from Paris by then. So the terms of the 1783 treaty that gave us our countryhood were that the colonies were now an independent nation, and they were called the United States of America. The British troops would leave the country, and the borders of the United States at that time reached from the Great Lakes south to Florida and from the Atlantic coast west to the Mississippi River. State governments would not prevent Americans from paying money that they owed to British creditors. So if they had debts they had to pay, they still had to pay them. And Britain would not stop its citizens from paying money owed to Americans. So free trade was still going to continue. Colonists agreed that the states would return property that was taken to loyalists, and loyalists would receive no further punishment. The British returned slaves, and the United States gained fishing rights up around Canada, including Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. So what you need to think about is which of these outcomes from the Treaty of Paris had the biggest political effect for the new nation. So the Revolutionary War was expensive in a couple of different ways. The first was cost. Many lives were lost. And so that was the first cost, sorry. While no one knows exactly how many people died, it's estimated that there was about 25,000 American soldiers and between 8,000 to 10,000 British soldiers. And then there was also about 7,500 Germans, because remember, the Germans had the Hessians, which came and fought for them as mercenaries. Furthermore, it left the government and its people owing a lot of money. Many soldiers returned from the war and they were completely broke because the government didn't have any money to pay their salaries. Congress at that time had issued paper money to pay the troops, but they had no value. The money had no value because the government had printed so many of them. So many patriots sold what they owned, including their homes and their land, just so they had enough money to buy food and clothing for their families. Because there was no real money, the government gave some of the men certificates for land along the western frontier as payment for their services. And that actually had two effects, both politically and socially. It helped the government maintain some trained soldiers in its more valuable frontier lands, because, you know, they were really vulnerable to Indian attacks. And it helped to stimulate the settlement of the frontier and move the country forward. So if you look at this map here, let's just look at this and look at, this was the borders. This was the borders of our country at the end of the Revolutionary War. Really tiny compared to what we are now, right? So the new national government was itself in debt. It had borrowed from other countries to pay for the war effort, and it actually owed between $30 and $40 million. So that was a lot more money back then than it is today, obviously. And in addition, the 13 states together owned a combined total of about $100 million in debt. So with all of that debt, they had to come to terms with losing its primary trade partner, because its primary trade partner was Britain. But now they could pursue trade alliances with other places, but they needed to go out and build those relationships. And also there were lands that were battlefields and graveyards, and they needed to have new ways for their people to make money. So, you know, despite the Treaty of Paris, many of the loyalists who lost property during the war didn't get it back. So they either left and didn't return, or they moved away. Most went to Canada, although some of them did go back to England.